welcome to episode 313 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 16th of December 2024. I'm Joe, and with me are Helium.
Ahoy, hi.
Graham.
Good evening.
And Will.
Hello.
Let's get straight on with our discoveries then. Will, you teased us a few weeks ago, it might be a couple of months ago now, with your security cameras, and you never got onto the software that you were running.
Yeah, so a little bit of context here then. I had some cameras that were made by a company that was going out of business, and they said, good luck, why don't you throw your cameras in the bin? And I went looking for an alternative, and I found ThingGeno, which sticks custom firmware on these cameras and allows you to have control over them locally. So the camera's back in action, but one of the features that I liked from those cameras was the ability to send me a push notification when it detected movement or sound within the house. I don't have a great need for cameras in my house. I live in a very low crime area. I'm not really interested in having something recording all the time. I don't want that. I don't need that. And I don't have cameras outside. So what I really want is just the ability to leave the house and effectively switch on the alarm and have the cameras listen and watch what's going on. And if something changes that shouldn't be changing, then it sends me a push notification. And at that point, I want to be able to view a live stream from that camera on my phone, and then I can take appropriate action.
I like the way you basically told us that the Tories hung on in your constituency there.
Did they?
With your low crime area.
I think they did. I don't even remember anymore. I'm pretty sure they did. Anyway, I won't get into politics. Fucking Tories. So all of this runs on my home network, which is powered by a Raspberry Pi 4, which is running some Docker containers for various services, some services running on the OS itself. I think it's a 4 gig Pi. There's not a lot of headroom on there. And receiving a network stream from a 1080p camera takes a fair amount of bandwidth of both CPU, memory, network. And so I just didn't want this service to be running all the time. So what I did was look at ThingGeno and find the web interface that allows you to enable and disable a feature on the camera called motion detection, which, when motion is detected, something happens. And in this case, it sends me a Telegram message. So that's great. I now have the ability to remotely enable and disable this feature from when I leave the house and receive a push notification from the camera itself. So there's no intermediate service other than Telegram and the internet. But, you know, it's pretty much as close as I can get to a direct message from the camera to my phone. What I didn't have the ability to do, though, was view that stream remotely without a whole lot of fussing around. The ThingGeno software does have the ability to run a VPN, but I don't really want to go down that route. And also, I'd quite like some integration into Home Assistant if possible. So I went looking for a package that could do this for me. And my first stop was Motion. And Motion is a project that has been around for at least 20 years. And I used it a long, long time ago when USB cameras first started getting supported under Linux. I used it then just to play with it. And it's kind of the KDE of video capture. There are 1,000,001 config options, and you can do some pretty advanced stuff. For example, you can create a mask, and the transparent parts of that mask are where it will look for motion, and the blacked out parts are where it will ignore, and everything in between gets a weighted average applied to it. So you can say, like, for example, if you've got some trees in the background, then the trees swaying in the breeze you could filter out just by making them slightly transparent. But if someone were to walk in front of the camera, it would still detect the movement in that area. So it's a really nice feature. And it also has the ability to restream the images using very little overhead. It can basically copy the stream to another stream, and it can combine streams as well. So far, so good. Motion is a lovely package. It's relatively easy to configure. Yes, there are 1,000,001 options, but the defaults are all sane. And out of the box, it basically works. If you want to get into it, the documentation is very good, and you can find some guides on their GitHub page as well. So I set all of this up. and had it restreaming to a RTSP stream, which can then integrate in Home Assistant, and then I can fire up the VPN. I can go into Home Assistant, and I can view the cameras when I get a message about something happening. But doing that uses pretty much all the spare CPU on my Raspberry Pi. So I also wanted a way just to start and stop those. But Motion comes with a System D unit already on Raspberry Pi. It includes one, and it is in the archive. And so now I have a script which is sort of arm the alarms, and it will start motion, and it will enable the motion detection feature on the camera. And when motion is detected, I will get a push notification from the camera, and the server will then start recording that to disk, and it will record N minutes before the motion was detected and N minutes after it's detected as well. So you don't just sort of get this video of somebody just suddenly appearing. It actually shows the sort of lead up to that event as well. It can do basic motion detection. It can draw boxes around things, and it does everything I want to do in a relatively small footprint, and it's a great piece of software. So my find really is Motion, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in doing video recording and motion detection and having events trigger and integrating with Home Assistant. Then it does all of those things, and it's definitely worth checking out.
Hang on. So it maxes out the Raspberry Pi because the Raspberry Pi isn't quite powerful enough. Maybe if you had an N100 Intel machine, maybe that
Pi
would
500,
actually...
is that what you said, Joe?
Pi 5, eh?
No, an Intel N100 box would do the job much better, I would argue.
It would, but I just don't want that inefficiency of running a service that I don't want running. So I don't need one, strictly speaking.
Right, so just max out the Pi whenever motion's detected then?
Yeah, when I'm away from home, which sadly is not very often.
I tried a bit of motion out with my outside Pi. I have a infrared floodlight, believe it or not, outside my house, which is nice because you can't actually see it, but the camera can because I use a Pi no IR filter camera. The only problem is I found that there was too much noise and motion would constantly false trigger for stuff. So I found it to not be of much use, but I guess if it's inside and not using infrared, you're fine.
I suspect that you could have tuned it better. Motion does have quite a nice tuning function that allows you to view what it thinks the sort of movement levels are and allow you to tune it. I wouldn't be surprised if given a couple of hours and a mask file, you could have tuned that down a bit. But I've never used it in infrared, so maybe it's just not suited.
Yeah, see, in infrared, it's like every pixel seems to fluctuate off and on almost in a ripple of 255 colors of grey. But yeah, it doesn't seem that that's plausibly good. I don't know. But I do have a upgrade of the camera, and I do need to put that on, the ones with the autofocus. So maybe I'll actually try that out again and give it a go.
Sounds like you need AI for this.
It really doesn't.
Well, speaking of AI, an alternative to Motion is Frigate, and I haven't really looked into this in a great amount of detail. What I do know is that you need to buy, we don't need to, but it is recommended that you buy an add-on USB card which offloads the processing of the video and the AI gubbins to a separate, I assume, SoC or FPGA or something. And using Frigate, you can really do some very clever things, like telling one person from another, or a human from an animal, or what the person is wearing, or what they look like almost. You can have AI describe the clothing that they're wearing, and then have that send you a push message with all of that description in it. And that sounds incredibly powerful, but it's not something that I have a need for, and so I haven't dug into it, and I haven't bought one of these special cards. But it does look like a pretty impressive piece of software. I suspect it's one of those things that you could lose weeks and weeks in, and when you're finished, it would be an amazing system. Just trying to avoid getting in that trap.
But in the meantime, Motion is doing the job for you then?
It is, yeah. It's basic, but it's functional, and it's reliable.
Is Frigate open source?
It is. If you go to their GitHub page, the license file says that it's MIT licensed. So it is. However, on their website, they do have a pro version, which I think is $50. And I don't know if that's per month or one-off cost.
Per year, that is. Frigate Plus.
And I've no idea what benefit you get from that over the open source version and where the difference between the two versions is and what is closed source and what is open source. I don't know.
It sounds really interesting. I might have a look into it. I've been meaning. I remember Motion from years and years ago, but back then it was impractical to I didn't want to run a big server to be able to do all the motion processing. So it's really interesting to me that even if it's maxing out the Pi, you can do it on a Pi now.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by ServerMania. Go to servermania.com/LNL to get 15% off dedicated servers recurring for life. ServerMania is a Canadian company with over a decade of experience building high-performance infrastructure hosting platforms for businesses globally. ServerMania has up to 20 gigabits per second network speeds in 8 locations worldwide for optimized global reach. They have flexible custom server configurations tailored to unique needs, as well as a personal account manager offering free consultations. With 24/7 live chat support and support ticket response times under 15 minutes, you can always keep your systems running smoothly. Alan Jude from 2.5 Admins has been a happy ServerMania customer for over 7 years. So support the show and join him at a hosting provider that truly delivers. Get 15% off dedicated servers recurring for life at servermania.com/LNL and use code LateNightLinux. That's servermania.com/LNL and code LateNightLinux. Graham, OctoPrint PSU control with Home Assistant.
Yes, I've recently got back into 3D printing. I've printed a load of stuff, things that take a long time. I think I may have mentioned this before, but I use OctoPrint on my Prusa, which is basically a web app running on a Raspberry Pi connected to the Prusa to control it. It's open source and it works with lots of different printers, and it can do the slicing and it can send the G code for instructing the printer. It's a really great way of upgrading an old printer that might not have like a web or Wi-Fi, and it can manage everything about your printer from the Raspberry Pi, basically sidestepping whatever firmware the printer's running. And with these long prints, it's in my office here. I got into the excuse of running them overnight. There is a fire alarm in here, but I want to turn the printer off when it's finished. And there's not a very easy way to do it because I want to shut down the Raspberry Pi running OctoPrint before I turn the power off on the printer. And the two things are connected.
So you don't want just a smart plug that'll just kill the power to the lot then?
Yeah, I want to shut down. And there's a couple of kind of solutions, and I've tried them. But the best that I've found is that there's Home Assistant integration. There's an entity for OctoPrint. So you can check the status of your print from Home Assistant and also control the system in terms of restarting and shutting down. There are entities for that. There's also one for the webcam if you've got one connected to OctoPrint, which is really great if you've got webcam integration in Home Assistant. It works really well for security cameras and for this. And with the OctoPrint entity in Home Assistant, you can link it to some kind of smart plug. I've got a Tapo one, with TP-Link Tapo one. And then all you have to do is basically create an automation, waiting for a print to finish, asking OctoPrint to shut down, and then turning the power off at the plug. It's just, it works. It's really easy. And I've never really used automations in Home Assistant because I'm also running Node-RED, which I've found easier. But automations are a bit like if this, then that, before it turned into a software as a service thing. You basically just, say if the printing has completed, then, shut down, wait 5 minutes and turn the power off. And it works really well.
So if your 3D printer is on but not actually printing, does it still use a shitload of electricity?
No, it doesn't, but
it's still a fire hazard.
I'm uncomfortable leaving it on. But also you can do other things like check for a higher temperature than it should be. There's a temperature alarm in the integration as well. You can check for a sudden temperature drop, which can happen if the tip falls off, and that does represent a fire hazard.
Wow.
What if it gets snagged up? Because isn't that a problem with 3D printers?
Yeah, you could create an error code and then shut down or ask it to restart. Usually when I'm leaving them overnight, I'm pretty confident that a print will work. But yeah, you can get it to shut down in those circumstances. But really the printer should look after itself if there's a risk. It's the hot plate and the tip that needs to be turned off, and it should manage that automatically. But I still feel uncomfortable with the printer being on.
That's a very fancy printer, isn't it, the Prusa?
I don't know. I think it's been surpassed by a lot of them now. I mean, it's been maybe 5 years old, and we built it ourselves. It's the old MK3S.
Haven't they pissed the community off recently?
I think we may have touched on this briefly. I don't know about super recently, but this is all based on the old RepRap open source firmware and the platform. And at least through the old MK3S era, everything was open source. The models that used to build the printer itself. And while the firmware wasn't, it was a fork of RepRap, and they used Prusa Slicer. With the latest generation, Joseph Prusa made a point about the fact that there were clones that were copying everything that they did and copying the firmware and the software, and they weren't comfortable with this, despite the fact that this is obviously how open source is supposed to work. And as I understand it, the latest generation of their printers now are closed source. So maybe that's what it is. It was contentious at the time. And it is sad, actually. I have to say that that's what they're taking, because they seem to be super successful even with the clones and even with it being open source. So I'm not sure what more they want.
But with yours being open source, even though it was old, presumably you still get some of the benefits of the more modern firmware and stuff.
Yeah, and to be fair, I've not looked into the open source version of it. They're still updating the firmware, and it always works perfectly. So I haven't had a problem.
Presumably the more modern ones have got higher resolution and stuff.
Yeah, and I think the real thing is they're much quicker, and they multiplex filament for colours. So mine's a single colour, and while you can get, I think it's called an MMU, to switch between different colours, those kind of units are now really integrated and multiples in terms of speed. They can print really quickly.
So if you had a more modern printer, you probably wouldn't need the Home Assistant stuff because it would just be done much more quickly, whereas you have to leave yours on overnight then.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of things that I print, maybe 10 centimetres across by a few centimetres high, they probably take 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours, a significant chunk of time. And it's in the room where I work, so I don't really like working when it's on. So the best time is the night.
Yeah, I've had people try and record podcasts with one going in the background, and it was not pleasant.
I also feel just a lot better that it's being turned off. And in theory, if I keep the printer clean after a job, I could turn it on and print, from the internet if I wanted to.
Can't see anything go wrong there at all.
Well, I've got the camera and I can shut it all off. But yeah, if there's a fire, then I'm screwed.
Do you have to print a test page with a 3D printer?
Yeah, I mean, there are equivalents, especially when you're doing your own design. You will always have to iterate on that design. But often if you're downloading something from Thingiverse, for example, it should just work, especially if it's been built on your printer.
Don't you always print that boat thing first?
Yeah, you do when you're putting your printer together or you've changed the settings.
Helium, Clever Notes with a K. This is some KDE shit, isn't it?
Oh, you better believe it is. So I have pretty much sorted out my task stuff by using Chris Warner's product, Task Finder. And I was amongst many different both RST and Markdown file formats for my documentation. And I'm fed up with it at this point. I have so many piles of documents and directories. Clever Note from KDE is excellent. And the one main feature it has that I love about it is the fact that it is double paneled, so you can do your Markdown on the left and then it'll tell you what it looks like on the right. So I can actually hide the editor window behind my browser and have my documentation over to the right on my ridiculously large 4K monitor. And that allows me to put all my documents in there nice and easy. And it works super, super well. There is extra stuff that I haven't really had a need for, like there's ways to draw in stuff into it and things like that. I haven't really need them. It even has a to-do thing I guess you can associate with a document if it is a project or whatever, but I'm pretty happy with Task Finder. But nice Markdown, easy to do, and actually displays the sort of changes that you do as you do them, not having to flick between it with a physical button. Fantastic. Love it. And I'll tell you what the best thing was. I said, do you know what I'd love if the triple backtick wrapped code sections, I thought, geez, I wish there was a button that you click on like a lot of websites have where you say copy all of the text that's in this box. And I said, I wonder, is there some way to suggest that to the developer? I looked at it and there was a way to do it on KDE Bugs, said it, and literally within the same day, the developer got back to me and said, oh, that's a really good idea. I'll do that. I was like, yes, win.
Nice.
Happy days.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/LNL. Tailscale is the easiest way to connect devices and services to each other, wherever they are. Everyone these days has a VPN as a sponsor, but Tailscale isn't like those. This isn't about hiding your browsing habits from coffee shop owners, and it's not about watching Netflix in another country. Tailscale is a proper VPN for connecting your devices securely. It's great for companies, and it's great for self-hosters. Tailscale runs on all the major platforms and is based on WireGuard. It's really easy to set up without opening ports, thanks to NAT traversal. That's one of the reasons loads of the Late Night Linux family hosts use Tailscale. Tailscale lets you give apps, IDEs, subnet routers, and other nodes in your tailnet secure access to any other resource in your network without exposing that resource to the public. Site-to-site networking lets DevOps connect the infrastructure their team relies on to securely transfer data between resources such as web applications and databases. Tailscale's personal plan will always be free, so support the show and try Tailscale out for free today. You'll get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free at tailscale.com/LNL with no credit card required. That's tailscale.com/LNL. Graham, Z-Rhythm 1.0, this is a digital audio workstation.
Yeah, and it's nice to bring these projects up sometime. It's been in development for a long, long time. I've used it a lot over the years. It's a DAW, a bit like Arda, a bit like Qtractor, but I've always really liked its GTK-based UI. It's minimal and it's really powerful. As MIDI editing, there's an audio editor in there. It features all the usual effects. I'd say it's a really nice UI, nicer than Arda. It's easier to use than Arda. It's quicker than Rose Garden, and I prefer it to Qtractor. And it really, congratulations on their 1.0 release.
Hang on. I've just scrolled to the bottom of their website. Testimonials, Graham Morrison right in the middle.
Aye.
Right, well, I honestly didn't know that was there. I promise.
Sure.
It is one of the best ways of composing music and exporting the audio files on, and then in brackets, GNU/Linux.
GNU/Linux.
And this is from 2019 when you were writing for Linux Magazine.
Oh my God.
Well, okay, so legitimately, it's great.
Uh-huh.
The photo review that they've used is from about 15 years ago as well.
Yeah. Now that you've mentioned it, it rings a bell. They asked, but I'd forgotten, and I hadn't scrolled down that far on the page.
Well, if they ever hear this, they're going to quote you again, probably.
Well, when you do the download, they seem to be trying to go after a kind of like Arda's subscription model. Certainly, they looked at their GitHub repo to make sure it was all still open source, and they say it is, but it's a little bit obfuscated where the licenses are all mixed into a contributing guide. And they're also announcing they've been working on 2.0 for some time. And so this is the beginning of the 2.0 era, which is going to be different. I mentioned GTK, they're moving to Qt.
Yay.
They mentioned cross-platform being the kind of main motivator for that, and that they've never been able to get stable macOS and Windows releases with GTK. So I mean, that's their ambition, I suppose, is to make it properly cross-platform. But it is great. I think it is a good piece of software.
Z-Rhythm relies on donations and purchases to sustain development. This month, we received $93. That's not very good, is it?
No, so maybe we can help.
Maybe, yeah.
It's great. I think if you're interested in this kind of thing, but put off by the likes of Arda, then I would definitely recommend. Z-Rhythm is the official pronunciation. Sorry, Joe.
Oh,
It's fucking Z-Rhythm. I don't give a shit. Helium.
Yeah, so funnily, on the back of your testing out laptop battery usage, initially I thought Selenium, which is a way to automate browser testing, would be a way to do some various projects for this thing. But then this came out, and Helium is a nice, easier way to do it. So under the covers, it's actually Selenium, but on top of it, it makes it a much easier way to select things on a page. So you don't have to know all the CSS IDs or whatever. So you can do things like start_Firefox, go to google.com and then say, write the words blah, and then it'll put that in the search box, and then you say press enter. And there's a very nice cheat sheet page telling you how to do it. And it's a fantastically easy way to do it, because Selenium is quite honestly awful to use. I had to use it once for a project, and it is obviously very powerful, but the usability is not great. And so Helium looks like quite a nice way to do that. And it's sort of a bit like Will's sort of beautiful soup / HTML ID browsing way of doing things last week. It's far nicer.
And the syntax for this, in the example at least, is very human readable.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's exactly what you expect it to work if you were like, just go fucking do the thing. And it goes and does the thing.
Yeah. Start_Chrome, for example.
Exactly. It's like not initialize browser and then find all the IDs on the page. You have to literally go through the code editor to find all the things in the page that you want to select. Nah, none of that. It picks the obvious.
The embedded video on the GitHub page is quite impressive. And as you say, it just seems easy to use. It's all about driving the browser, though. Is there any like introspection so you can do assertions and actually do proper testing on this?
I don't know. I imagine it probably is, because I imagine it's probably used for like test harnesses and stuff like that. So I would think that it would. I haven't used it well enough, to be honest. I've only just fired it up and tried. But yeah, I would think that if Selenium can do it, it can also do it, and possibly in a nicer way.
Yeah. Oh, this warrants further investigation. This is a good find. Thank you.
Yeah, and it supports Chrome and Firefox, which is nice that it still supports Firefox.
It's a browser.
For now it is, yes. Graham, Vim Medieval.
Yeah, I don't know why it's called Vim Medieval, because it doesn't have anything to do with medieval stuff.
Is it the torture that you go through to use it?
Hey, it could be. Yeah, it could be. But it does have something to do with Vim. I work in Vim and I work in Markdown, and Vim Medieval is a way of testing blocks of code that you write in Markdown. So in the snap documentation, for example, there's a lot of code blocks where you type a snap command that does a certain thing, snap install hello world or whatever it happens to be. With Vim Medieval installed as a plugin on your Vim, you can run a shortcut in Vim and it'll test from within Vim whether that command still works. So you have to construct the code blocks so that they work, and it'll return the standard error code or working code or nothing at all if it's working. And I found that a really convenient way when I'm working and editing on a document to test and make sure that things are still working without opening up a shell and running it myself, and short of having a proper testing framework for documentation, which is something that we should use, but we don't, at least not in the way that the documentation I work on is published from Discourse. It's like the next best thing. And I found it just really convenient to have under my Vim muscle memory.
Well, I've got a Markdown-related discovery, and that is Markdown. And this is something from Microsoft. And this library is a utility tool for converting various files to Markdown. And it presently supports all sorts, including PDF, PowerPoint, Word, Excel, images even, or at least the metadata from images. But yeah, it supports DocX and XLSX and everything. So potentially, if you've got a document that you can't open, you might be able to just render it as Markdown. I don't know. I've not tried this, but it seems interesting.
That is interesting. As an aside to this, I noticed recently that Google Docs now allows you to copy text from a document as Markdown and paste it into whatever, which is actually really convenient for me because a lot of people collaborate in a Google Doc, for example, and you can copy and paste that into something that you can make as part of an official documentation.
But you cannot say boo to this, Helium. This is an open source tool from Microsoft. It's great.
I think it uses AI. I swear I saw something about it using AI.
Really?
I think so. I'm not 100% certain. And I'm searching for as we speak.
It's a tiny Python library.
Yeah, that's the problem. Because it's doing all those different documents. How's it doing it? I think it hoovers it off to the cloud.
I think, ironically, Helium, you have hallucinated that it needs AI.
Oh, that wouldn't even surprise me at this point. Ha! Ha! Well. I'm looking at the Python code as we speak. And it says, from OpenAI, import OpenAI, client equals OpenAI, open close parentheses. Boom.
Well, you can prove anything with facts, can't you?
I knew I didn't like it.
It does say you can also configure Markdown to use LLM to describe images. I think that might be where that's coming from.
Yeah, okay, whatever.
So everyone's wrong. Okay, this episode is sponsored by Entroware. Go to entroware.com. Entroware sells computers with Ubuntu and Ubuntu Mate pre-installed. They've got a range of desktops, laptops, and servers, and most parts are configurable, so you can pick the CPU, RAM, and storage that's right for you. If you can't find exactly what you want, then do contact them and they'll work with you on a bespoke solution that's perfect for your needs. They ship to the UK, Republic of Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And if you do buy one of their machines, there's a little drop down at checkout and you can select Late Night Linux so they'll know that we sent you. So go to Entroware.com for all your Linux computing needs. On to a bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you even get some episodes early. And if you want to get in contact, you can email show@latenightlinux.com. Let's do some feedback then. Chris writes, should Raspberry Pi OS change the default environment to something else? The original Raspberry Pi had a feeble CPU and very little RAM, so running the likes of KDE or GNOME would have been out of the question back then. There was no choice but to go with the lightweight alternative. The Raspberry Pi 5 is considerably more powerful, however, and is capable of running any desktop environment out there, so should they change the default? First impressions are important, and I think it's fair to say that the Pi desktop does look dated. Perhaps cosmetic things shouldn't matter, but they do.
No, they shouldn't change. As we previously talked about, Raspberry Pi is in use in a lot of establishments where it will be there for a long time. I think changing the desktop on a Raspberry Pi now will have a massive cheese-moving effect, and the people who like it like that, and it's always been that way for the last however long Raspberry Pi's been around, potentially could be confused. Teachers know how to operate it. They've practiced on it. They know what they're doing. Keep it the same. The hobbyists who use it probably know enough to install a different desktop if they wanted to, and everybody else will just use it and not really think twice, in my opinion.
There's also the fact that you can take an SD card out of a Pi 5 that's running the latest Raspberry Pi OS and put it in a Raspberry Pi 1, and it will boot to a desktop. It'll be very slow and quite painful, but you can do that. And so you can put that SD card in any of the Pis, any generation, right from the first one up to the latest one.
Can you do that with your N100, Joe?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, okay.
And so they're not going to change it for that reason. It needs to be able to at least run in a basic sense on the old Pis, so backwards compatibility. But I think that honestly what Will said is more important, really.
I don't think there'd be anything wrong with somebody maybe graphically minded taking a look at it. It does look a bit utilitarian.
Yeah, it could be themed better is the bottom line.
Yeah.
And that doesn't need any more resources to look nicer.
I think it's a great question. I'd love to say that they should switch to KDE Plasma, but I think everybody's right. I just think it would break too many things. Be nice if they could consider like some, oh no, we've talked about this and it's never going to work, some seamless transition over time.
Well, they've transitioned to Wayland, haven't they? And they managed to do that relatively successfully, I think.
It would be amazing to recommend a different desktop and to have a really great desktop out of the box for people running Pis or powerful Pis in things like the 500s that we were talking about. It'd be nice.
But again, if you're an enthusiast, you can just install whatever you want on it. You can get an Ubuntu image, I think, certainly for the Pi 5.
Yeah.
But people talk about them being really powerful these days, but you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but even compared to a really low-end x86 box like an M100, they're a bit shit. So, you know, it'll run GNOME and Plasma, but it's not going to run it well. Whereas the LXDE fork or whatever they're maintaining, Raspberry Pi desktop or whatever, is very lightweight and is the best experience you're going to have as a desktop on any kind of Pi. Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back next week when, all being well, it'll be a review of the year. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phelan.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Will.
See you later.